Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you this Sunday morning in just a few weeks before Christmas. I bring you greetings from the sunny northeast of England. Hope you're having some nice weather where you are. And I must admit I was quite surprised when Paul asked me to speak about the wise men, because I've always believed you should ask people to speak about something that they know about. So maybe it's not so much because I'm wise, but it may be because I know about camels and deserts and Middle Eastern spices. Because you may know that my wife and I have just come back from 4 years working in Dubai and in the Gulf, where I was a head teacher. But anyway, all the advice I would give you in relation to my experience of the Middle East is never ride a camel. So our theme for today is under the title King Forever, Ceasing Never. The wise men wonder. And I guess the first question I want to ask us and talk about is these wise men. Were they wise men? It's very likely that these men came from the area which we most associate with Daniel and Babylon and Persia. In fact, you may have heard them described as the Magi, M-A-G-I, the first 4 letters of the word magic. Because the Magi was a phrase first used in the time of Daniel. It's actually on a tablet of stone from the days of Darius. And you'll recognise the name King Darius from the book of Daniel. And we know that those men in that culture were very studious, very academic. If you look at the history of the development of science and maths, you'll find the Arabic nations very much to the fore in proposing theories around maths and science and in studying those great topics. But they were also great students of astronomy, the study of the heavens, how the seasons operate, how the heavenly bodies move around. However, they had, as we know from Daniel's time, turned astronomy, that's the scientific study, into astrology, a kind of religious belief that the heavens tell you your future, that they are a kind of communication tablet from the supernatural. And we know, therefore, that Magi and magic became associated with false religion, false worship, and the elevation of what we now call the dark arts, things that the Bible condemns and tells us to stay well clear of. So whatever the ultimate purpose and motive behind these travellers from the East, we know that they were students of the sky. And therefore they knew exactly how to read the charts and the heavens. And when a new star appeared, they were fascinated. It's not unlikely that they had heard through generations of Daniel and the Jewish traditions and the Jewish religion and the Jewish scriptures. And in Numbers 24, they may be familiar with the prophecy that says, a star shall come out of Jacob and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It's Numbers 24 verses 16 and 17. Of course, they didn't read all of the scriptures, otherwise they would have been able to read the prophecy in Micah that tells them where they should go, but we'll come on to that in a minute. So these wise men were students of the sky. They were also aware, perhaps even through Daniel and the exile, of what the Jews thought and what this prophecy was about, that a star would emerge, a new star, and it would be connected to the rising of a king, a scepter, a king in Israel. And so when their observations of the heavenly bodies revealed a new star, they were fascinated. And they got on their camels and they headed west. So they were wise men from the east travelling west. What they got wrong was they went to the wrong place. Now you might say, well, they went to the obvious place. If they hadn't read the prophecy in Micah, where else would you go to find the king of Israel? The newborn king would be born in the palace, presumably. So they arrived at Jerusalem, and famously from your nativity plays, my nativity plays, and from Matthew chapter 2, where these events are recorded. They arrived at Herod's and said, we've come looking for the newborn baby who's born King of the Jews. We've seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. And it's Herod who secretly finds out from his wise men, where's this baby going to be born? And he tells our three visitors, if there were three, that it's actually Bethlehem you need to go to. They'd got it wrong. They needed to go a little bit further. I'm fascinated by that reality and how that plays into our lives. Sometimes we read the Bible and we think we understand it, but we don't read the whole Bible. We maybe take a verse and cling to it, but we haven't read other verses that complement and help us to understand it better. And we apply our human logic, a little bit like these visitors. And we work out, well, this is how God's going to have to do it. Sometimes we would like God to do it our way. Sometimes we think we've got it all worked out, exactly how our life is going to go, exactly what God is going to do when. But let's pause. We may have got it wrong. And God may take us to an unexpected place. Bethlehem was certainly unexpected. Jerusalem was buzzing with power. Tension, yes, because the Romans were there, but the king was also there, Herod. It was a place full of religious pomp and ceremony because the temple was there. And of course we know it was also a place of hypocrisy and religious banditry, really, forcing people to sacrifice the temple doves at extortionate prices. So it was a place you might well describe as bustling with human ego. And that's not where Jesus chose to be born. Bethlehem was the city of David. It was a place named after David, who was close to the heart of God. I guess it was very much in the shade of Jerusalem. More humble place, a busy place at the time of the census, yes, but close to the spiritual heart of the nation. Whereas Jerusalem, in spite of having the temple, had become a kind of pseudo-spiritual place, where people were more preoccupied with themselves than with God. There's a little nudge to us. Not only are we sometimes wrong in trying to tell God this is the way things have to be, and then we find out he takes us to an unexpected place, but also we sometimes may get more involved and caught up in our egos, in pomp, in ceremony, in our position in the church, our position in the community, our wealth, our power. But actually God wants to take us to a more humble place that's closer to the heart of God, where we can be more the kind of people that he's looking for us to be. So I don't know whether Jerusalem and Bethlehem is in your life, but quite clearly our wise men were not totally wise, because they ended up in the wrong place, or they got to the wrong place. They ended up in the right place eventually, because God corrected them and took them on. So, we think there are three, as I said earlier, because there are three gifts that are associated with these visitors. The Magi presented their gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh, and I'm sure you've heard many sermons about what gold, frankincense and myrrh might mean. But I want you to turn your telescope around and actually look at those gifts from God's point of view. You see, we can get mistaken in think of all the things I do for God. Think of all the things I give to God. I've given up this. I give this much into the offering plate. Look at what I've sacrificed for God. Now, don't get me wrong. It is not wrong to do things to please God. But we must never get that reality ahead of the fact that we can do nothing to buy our forgiveness. We can do nothing to earn forgiveness from God. The fundamental order of spiritual reality is, let's understand what God has given to us. And as a result of that, let's give back to him. Not let us work on giving so much to God that he will have to forgive us. He will have to give us a place in heaven, because look at the balance of good things I've done compared to bad things. So in turning our telescopes around, instead of thinking we're the ones who are the dominant, let's think of God looking down at us and saying, okay, think about the gifts this way. Gold. I've got a place in heaven for you. Are the streets paved in gold? I'm not sure. It's going to certainly be wonderful. But it's not going to be a place dominated by wealth, where you use gold to buy things that other people can't afford, or you earn more gold than somebody else because of what you do. Heaven's going to be a great equalizing place in those terms. So God says, don't worry about wealth. Don't build up for yourself treasures on earth. Build up treasures in heaven, where the gold is of a different order. It's about beauty. It's about solidity. It's about preciousness. It's not about wealth. Frankincense. Frankincense is associated with the sacrifices that priests made. And again, people think of, well, look at the sacrifices I'm making for God. And of course, the Jewish nation thought that their sacrifices would get them right with God. But although they sacrificed as God had asked them to, their hearts weren't in the right place. Turn our telescope around. God has given us forgiveness through what Jesus Christ did on the cross. The frankincense of priestly order is that Christ brings us into the presence of God. We don't need a priest to step into that place. Christ is the only mediator, the only one who can bring us to God. He stands in the middle and brings us together. So as well as thinking of heaven and what a wonderful place it will be, think of the wonder that Jesus brings us to God, nobody else. And lastly, the myrrh. Myrrh is a spice, a sweet-smelling spice. Although we associate it with the ointments that the ladies brought to put on Jesus' body for embalmment. Actually, there are far more references in Scripture and into encyclopedias and dictionaries to myrrh as a beautiful perfume, a beautiful smell. Myrrh comes from a thorny plant, and there's a great simple message in that. That out of the thorns of Calvary, the crown of thorns pierced through Christ's forehead, we've been brought the sweet smell of forgiveness. So, that's why we think there were 3 wise men. That's why we think there were maybe 3 kings, 3 magi. But let me get to our final point. Wise men wonder. What do they wonder? Wonder has 2 meanings, doesn't it? Awe and wonder is when you're just amazed. We've just been blessed with a grandchild. Many of you will know Lauren and Angus. So Chloe arrived 2 months ago, I think. Yesterday. I'm terrible with dates. But it's just amazing to look at her. I'm amazed at the size of her fingernails. They're tiny and yet they're perfectly shaped and they've got little white bits on the top. She even gets them cut. But there is that sense of wonder. Wow, how on earth did God design this to happen? And how has it been growing within Lauren? And how has it all come together? And now we've got this little girl who I just can't wait to meet when she's able to express her personality and talk to me. I guess if you're a grandpa, you know that amazing wonder that you feel. So, I'm sure the 3 wise men had that sense of amazement. This new star is amazing. Look, it's moving, it's travelling, it seems to be taking us in a direction. That's amazing. What amazing thing are we going to find? And when they found Jesus, they bowed down and worshipped. The other sense of wonder is, I'm not quite sure what something means. I wonder why he did that. Or I wonder what I'm going to get for Christmas. So it's not the wonder of amazement, it's the wonder of uncertainty. And none of us know what the 3 wise men, I keep having to use that phrase, what they thought when they worshipped. As they travelled their way home, because of the intercepting dream, they didn't go back to Herod's. Were they thinking, Well, that was all very nice, that was amazing, and we've given our presents, so let's get back and see if there's any more stars appear. Or did they go back and look at each other and thinking, dear me, what was that about? Is that baby really going to be the king when he's not born in Jerusalem? He's born in really humble surroundings. How could he ever become king? I wonder, is their king in Jerusalem going to be overthrown? And somehow he's going to become king? Did they go back to where they'd come from and watch the news, so to speak? Listen to the travelling tradesmen who were talking about things in Jerusalem. Whatever happened to that guy? Did they ever hear 33 years later that he died on a cross? Were they even alive 33 years later? I wonder. You might wonder. Wise men wonder. Sometimes we're left in situations where we don't quite know what God's doing. Our life seems to have taken a kind of Bethlehem twist. We thought we were all solid, but something's happened. We've lost our job, or we've lost a loved one, or our health is failing, or something's happened, a relationship's broken down. And we thought that was going to be okay, and it's not now. I would just say to you, yes, wonder. But don't wonder about God in the sense of, oh, I wonder what you're doing here. Wonder in the sense that you know God's got a plan. Wow, Lord, this isn't what I planned, but you must have something far better for me, even if it's tough. And that's where I want to leave us. Being Irish, you might have thought, well, the talk about the three wise men should have 3 points. The wise men, God takes us to unexpected places. The gifts, think of them from God's perspective, not your own. And now, wonder. Well, there's your 3 points, Nigel. Well, I'm going to make a fourth. And I'm going to take us back to what I said earlier about Daniel and Darius being the origins of the concept of Magi. And I want to take you to meet 3 other wise men and a king. A king who was so proud and so egotistical that he built a statue, and he insisted that everybody should bow down to it. And if you didn't bow down, you get thrown in a fiery furnace. You know who they are. I'm always getting criticised for my pronunciations, but here goes. It was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 3 young wise men. 3 of the young men who were trained in Babylonian literature and culture at the same time as Daniel was. And yet these 3 young men were to be thrown into a fiery furnace because they wouldn't bow down to a statue. They wouldn't break the first and second of God's 10 commandments. They said before they were thrown in, look, King, however powerful you think you are, our God's able to deliver us from this. But if he doesn't, then we're prepared to trust him. We're not going to break his commandments. And the miracle, of course, was that not only were they thrown into that fiery furnace and came out unscathed, not even smelling of smoke, but while they were in there, God stood alongside them. And the king said, I thought we'd thrown 3 in there, but there are 4. I guess you came to this morning's service thinking, the wise men, the 3 wise men from the east, we know who they are. But I'm suggesting we finish our talk with thinking, oh, those are the 3 young wise men thrown into a furnace in the east by a king who was not king forever. What king is, other than the king who we worship, the King of Kings, the Lord Jesus Christ. So as Christmas gets nearer, I wish you and your family and your church and your neighbours and your community all the very best. And I'll leave you with those thoughts. God can take us to unexpected places. Go with him there, because sometimes we get it wrong. Think of everything that God has given us rather than what we can give him. And let us give things to him on the basis of what he has first given us, not the other way around. Be full of wonder. Not doubting wonder and uncertainty, but the amazing truth that God's in control, God's got his plan, God's working everything together for good, even though we think it doesn't look great where we're standing now. And lastly, join those 3 young wise men and say, whatever life has for me, God can deliver me from every problem, or God might take me through the problem, But what I know is, wherever I go, God stands beside me. God bless you, and as I say, have a very happy Christmas.